One of my favorite journalists just exposed one of the most dangerous colonial betrayals of Africa in a live interview for the entire world to see. And the person he exposed is not a president, it's not a minister, and it's not one of the usual corrupt elites we always blame. The truth is far more alarming. So in this video, we're going to talk about a hidden class of Africans, people born and raised in the continent who work as loyal agents of Western interests, often with the approval, even with the praise of African institutions. They shape the minds of our youth, they influence our politicians and lawmakers, and they operate in plain sight, welcomed with open arms by African society because they present themselves as helpers and protectors of the continent. If you care about defending Africa from this subtle but highly effective form of neo-colonial control, then this video is for you. If you don't know me, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. And on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. So yesterday, I came across a panel-style show published on Russia Today, featuring David Hundeyin, one of my favorite investigative journalists. I follow his work closely on X and YouTube and genuinely respect the risks he has taken for the continent of Africa. If you don't know his story, he is currently living in exile from his home country of Nigeria because of his reporting. He has exposed corruption and systematic injustices, despite receiving direct death threats from some of the most powerful people in the country. Also on the panel was Samson Itodo, Executive Director of Yiga Africa, and Musa Ibrahim, Executive Secretary of the African Legacy Foundation. While Musa had several valuable insights, for the purpose of this video, we're going to focus on David and Samson. You see, the panel came together to discuss Guinea-Bissau, the coup, the military takeover that's currently unfolding right now. The host asked the panel to explain what lies behind the trend of coups happening across Africa. So let's take a listen to what David Hundeyin says.
I think it's fair to say that the political climate over the past few years has trended in a direction where more than ever now, the primary driver of public political opinion or political direction is no longer the same old talk about corruption or being democratic or undemocratic, and it has moved on to what I think is the key issue, which is issues regarding national sovereignty. The coups that we witnessed in what is now the Alliance of Sahel states, for example, had that as a central burning issue, that these countries consider themselves to be neo-colonially controlled by extraneous entities such as France or the US, and they have decided that the only way to meaningfully gain some measure of sovereignty, to take control of their own economic and political destiny into their own hands, is to do so using force, because the levers of the so-called democratic state have been completely subsumed into this, supranational entity that nobody really seems to have any control of, this transnational behemoth, which is controlled by these perceived imperial entities. So up against that situation, the public reaction has been, well, if what we think of as a democracy is not actually democratic because we are not in control of it, we vote for somebody and someone else that we didn't vote for gets into power and receives foreign support and is able to remain in power whether we want him there or not. The decisions that are being taken, the economic and political decisions that are being taken, are not being taken in the interests of the people of the country, but are being taken in the interests of entities in Paris and in Washington or wherever. Then in that case, no matter how much a military rule might seem like an ugly option that, maybe 15, 20 years ago would have seemed like something nobody wanted to go through again, it's now become the case that people are like, you know what, if that's the only way out of this quagmire that we found ourselves in, called, democracy, this pseudo-democratic thing that is actually not democratic at all, then we'll take our chances.
Many of you have dropped comments asking how you can support this channel, even offering to donate or help financially. Until recently, I had no way to make this possible, but now through my Substack, it's never been easier for you to lend me some support. There's a free tier where you'll get one email per week, and for just $5 a month, about the price of a nice coffee, you'll receive a daily written update from all of my content, everything I produce. I'll be engaging with those of you who join, asking your thoughts on how to serve you and the continent better. Sometimes my videos do get demonetized, and there's also a small chance, as we saw with the Platform Africa stream, that a channel like this could be deplatformed. Even if the worst happens, we can regroup, rebuild, and keep pushing forward. We don't want any third party controlling this message, so with email backing us up, we can communicate directly. Thank you in advance for signing up. I look forward to connecting with you, not just on YouTube, but via email as well.
We've seen it said in the Sahel, for example, that the so-called military juntas are actually more democratic in any meaningful sense than what came before them. Well, you have a situation where the elected president of a country like Niger, for example, Mohamed Bazoum, was elected in 2020. The election that brought him into office was an election where he barred his main opposition rival from taking part in the election. So he basically ran unopposed. He ran against himself. The election was largely boycotted by all the opposition, and he won, declared himself winner, and he led the country without a popular mandate. And supposedly that was democratic. And then the popular coup that took him out of power in 2023, you had Nigerians going out into the streets to back the coup regime. I think that says a lot, because if the dictionary definition of democracy is government of the people, for the people, by the people, and the people seem to be of the opinion that this form of governance, which wears a military uniform, represents them more than this elective form of government that they have no control over, then which one is actually the democratic one? I think it's a very good question.
I could not have articulated this any better than David did right here. However, David's opinion came up against some opposition. Let's take a listen to what Samson said.
I think the problem isn't elections. It's about the quality of those elections, because elections are a strong democratic tool for recruiting leaders. And so we cannot jettison the idea of elections, because it gives people the opportunity to express their choice on their preferred leader. So it is a fundamental component of democracy. I think the biggest challenge is the fact that you're beginning to see a trend where elections are not democratic, and they are captured by political elites who want power at all costs. So with this declining quality of elections, I think it is important that, one, whether it's ECOWAS or the citizens of those countries, would need to rise to the occasion to hold democratic institutions to account. Because there's no alternative whatsoever to democracy. There's no alternative to elections. I don't particularly agree with those who suggest that majority of Africans are pandering towards military dictatorship. I think that some of those who do so, they do so from a very uninformed point of view. Because when you go to these countries that are under military dictatorship, go and speak to the ordinary citizens, go and speak to civil society, go and speak to media, you would see that their lives are not in any way better. There's a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of disinformation in the public space that tends to project that military dictatorship is an alternative to democracy. It is not. It was never, and it will never be. The short-termism that comes with some of those results are not ones that deliver sustainable progress. And that's what people actually demand. So I don't particularly agree, because when you take a country like Burkina Faso, go and check the level of human rights violations in that country. There are human rights activists who are on exile, who cannot go back to their country. There are cases of disappearances of citizens who are asking difficult accountability questions. So it is not in any way, the best or an alternative to democracy.
Essentially, Samson promotes a sanitized, approved democracy message that we have all grown up hearing, regardless of whether you're in the West or whether you're in Africa. The problem with Samson's position is that it fails to address the position which David brought up. That point that David brought up actually supersedes the concept of democracy itself. Let's say it's the root cause of the problem. And that question is this: what happens when the democracy that we all have to promote and say is the only way to govern a country is captured by a foreign entity, and essentially is a charade that doesn't give the people any true say or any good outcomes for their country? So in rebuttal to Samson, David tries to point this out.
At this point in time, the conversation about the type of governance that is needed for Africa should have and has transcended these simplistic, reductive conversations about democracy and authoritarianism and primacy of elections or no elections. I think based on a lot of the information that has come out this year, for example, it should have been abundantly clear to anyone who hasn't been living under a rock that a lot of the supposed infrastructure of international democracy is anything but that, right? Samson, who obviously the co-panelist here, who has had quite a bit to say about how democracy is supposedly a gold standard for governance and there's no alternative to democracy, I think it would be remiss not to point out that if he held any other opinion or if he expressed any other opinion, he wouldn't be sat in that seat. For the simple reason that the organization which he leads is literally funded by NED. It says so on its website. So that being the case, if the civil society infrastructure of a country which is running a democracy, and as we know, the democracy is heavily reliant on the media and civil society, the junction of the two, to hold leaders accountable and all those other buzzwords that we use. And then that entire civil society infrastructure is being held up by a budget coming out of Washington. Is that democracy? If your entire country's system of government is basically an extension of US foreign policy, how on earth is that democratic? It's not a democracy, it's just a Western dictatorship with extra steps, right? So I don't agree that there is some sort of democratic gold standard that the world has to abide by, that it's a rule, it's a law written down in some cosmic Bible somewhere. I think that's absolute nonsense. I think that's not true at all. I think in this day and time that we live in as Africans, we should have the agency to examine structures that have worked elsewhere in the world, such as in China, for example. Now, the Chinese claim to run what they call it a democracy. You might disagree with that. You might call it an authoritarian system of government. I'm not really so much interested in labels. What I'm interested in is, has it worked? Does it work? Well, over the past 35, 40 years, China has lifted 900 million people out of poverty. Most of the poverty eradication that has ever taken place in human history, the 300,000 plus years of humanity as a species, has taken place over the past 40 years. And it's the Chinese government that has been responsible for making that happen. Now, do they hold these big national elections with an elected president and elected Senate and all of those paraphernalia of an electoral democracy? No. They don't have any of those things. However, the results speak for themselves. They're the world's most efficiently run country, and they're the world's most successful economy. They are the world's biggest economy already in terms of purchasing power parity. So does it work? It absolutely does. The example of Burkina Faso was mentioned in a pejorative sense, and I think it's important to also mention Burkina Faso, that supposedly there's human rights violations and some people are not happy. Well, since Ibrahim Traore took power in 2022, what has been the economic performance of Burkina Faso? Its economy in 3 years has grown cumulatively 43%. So is it working? That's the question. When you compare that to a democratic country like Nigeria, where I come from, and where Samson comes from, which since 2015 has shed 61% of its GDP, and it's a democracy, it has all that paraphernalia. And then it has people like myself who also cannot come home, also for fear of their lives. But it's a democracy, and it's approved by all the Western, the usual Western players. And, they hold their seminars and they shake their hands and they do all those nice things. But in practice, is it working? It clearly is not. So at this point, we really shouldn't be having conversations based on buzzwords. We should be having conversations based on facts, based on data. What is working? What has worked? And I think it's very fair to say that when we have that conversation honestly, and when it's not a weighted conversation that is being colored by the interests that we represent based on, whatever, power that we answer to, I think it's going to be very obvious where the answer is going to be leading to.
And here we get to the crux of the issue. Samson is speaking this official narrative, and he's doing so whilst being funded by foreign agencies, one of which is the NED. I went to Samson's website, and lo and behold, just like David said, he even publicly states on his website that he is a partner with the NED. You might be asking, who is the NED? Well, they're a United States entity funded by the United States government. It presents itself as a promoter of democracy and human rights across the world, but their history reveals something very different. The NED was created in the 1980s to take over the work of the CIA in a very specific mode. Instead of covert operations, they would now fund political groups, civil society organizations, media platforms, and activists in other countries to promote narratives that align with the United States foreign policy. They do not hide this, they're proud of this. But here's the hypocrisy hiding in the center of the narrative. The same NED that claims to defend democracy has also been directly involved in the destabilization of democratically elected governments many times. I've already made a video about how they interfered in the situation of Nepal just a month or so ago. They funded the opposition, the groups that decided to take down the country. They pushed the narrative that went against the policies of an elected government. I recommend you go and watch that video if you want to fully grasp the way they meddle and participate in regime change and overthrows of democratically governed countries. The truth is, it is just not very democratic at all. So when Samson repeats their messaging about protecting democracy, he is repeating the narrative of an organization that has helped to topple democracies when those democracies do not align with the United States. This is disingenuous at its core. He is defending a system that does not even practice the values that he's promoting here in front of all of us. And this is where Samson becomes a symbol of a much bigger problem. He's not just one man on a panel arguing for democracy. He represents a class of Africans who are funded across the continent, thousands of them, to deliver a particular message, a message that sounds noble on the surface because it comes packaged with the charity and development angle. This is money for schools, training for youths, support for election monitoring, and grants for communities. And because those actions look so good on the front end, society accepts these individuals and their opinions with open arms. But the real influence happens in the background, where these same individuals become trusted voices that push a foreign-approved narrative into the continent of Africa, particularly in political spaces. They become the intellectual shield that protects the same systems of extraction and predatory behavior that keeps Africa weak. Their message is taken as unquestionable truth, especially among educated classes in the continent, because it sounds so sophisticated, progressive, and it sounds right. This idea that democracy is automatically better than any other system of governance is presented as a fact, not a topic for debate. I grew up in the UK, and even I believed these things. I believed that democracy was unquestionably superior. I believed China was a dangerous authoritarian state that wanted to take over the world. But when you begin to peel back the layers, when you start to look at outcomes instead of propaganda, you realize that these so-called facts are not facts at all. They are narratives deliberately shaped. They are taught in schools. They are pushed to young people and the populations worldwide through systems like the one funding Samson right now. When David brought up China, he was not praising every aspect of their system. China definitely has elements that I don't agree with. But what David did was he pointed out the undeniable truth that China has lifted 900 million people out of poverty without Western-style elections, and that is mostly in the last 40 years. I would be happy to talk about democracy after Africa lifts its impoverished people out from poverty into abundance, building a middle class and developing the continent. You see, David was showing that development is possible outside of the Western model. And let's face it, Africa has been running on the Western imperial model for a long time, and the results don't bear out. Africa should not imprison itself inside ideology simply because foreign-funded voices keep repeating it. Let's take a moment, for example, to examine Nigeria itself, the country that Samson and David are both from, as well as myself, in part. Nigeria is one of the continent's biggest so-called democracies. If democracy is the standard Samson insists we must never question, then Nigeria should be a shining example. Instead, what we see is a system that raises even bigger questions about foreign influence, state capture, and the illusion of choice. Nigeria's current president, despite being a product of a democratic process, has long-standing allegations connected to drug trafficking and money laundering within the United States. I'm talking about heroin. These issues are not speculation. These are documented. Yet somehow he climbed through the political system and became a leader of Africa's most populous nations. Many Nigerians believe this alone is evidence that powerful foreign hands shape the country's political outcomes. But here is where the hypocrisy becomes almost undeniable. David Hundeyin, the investigative journalist, sitting right there on the same panel as Samson, has been one of the most prominent voices exposing these contradictions. He revealed details, he produced documents, and he challenged that narrative. And for that, he is now in exile. His life has been threatened, his safety compromised. His ability to return to his own country is taken from him. He is not welcome. This completely destroys Samson's argument about dictatorships being dangerous because people go into exile. David is living proof, even in a Western-approved democracy, the truth tellers can be hunted. The repression Samson associates with military rule is happening right under the banner of democracy. And the irony is impossible to ignore, because one of the men facing democratic persecution is sitting across Samson on the very panel challenging the system Samson is so harshly defending. And let us widen the lens even further. Singapore, once a colonial subject, is now wealthier than its former colonial master. They achieved this not copying Western-style multi-party democracy, but through a model focused on sovereignty, discipline, long-term planning, and national unity under a consistent leader. Somehow that phrasing sounds a lot nicer than dictator, which is a label thrown around way too easily right now. A system that Western institutions would label authoritarian. Yet it worked. It produced stability, wealth, development, and far exceeded what many democracies have achieved. Look at the trend right now. People are leaving the UK, going to non-democratic states like Dubai and Singapore. That's just a quick side note. Singapore, China, and even the rapid rise of Burkina Faso under Traore all prove a simple truth. Democracy is not the be-all and end-all. It's only one path. And if you look at some of the results we see, it may not be the most effective path under certain conditions, or should we say, particularly in the continent of Africa. And this is exactly why these foreign-funded voices keep insisting that democracy is non-negotiable, because it works for them, because it is the system that exists for external powers to manipulate and influence in the continent of Africa. So these individuals who appear on television, on panels, on podcasts, who influence the social media that your child watches, who speak at conferences, who advise governments, who teach young people, who write reports, who claim to be speaking on behalf of accountability and good governance. They never challenge the currency systems like the CFA franc that keep Africa dependent. They never challenge the multinational corporations that profit from African resources. They never challenge the Western governments that shape Africa's political outcomes. They focus only on the surface level. We don't have democracy. No democracy, Africa bad. They say the problem is bad elections, not foreign structures that control the elections through neo-colonial systems. They say that the problem is lack of institutions, or they just say it's corrupt leaders, which is basically what Samson was saying throughout this interview. And then they follow up with the fact that there is no alternative to democracy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why this class is so dangerous. And yes, there are problems with corrupt leadership, but this class of people that promote this type of democracy are very dangerous. They don't need to be corrupt, collecting envelopes under the table. They do not need to be evil. They simply need to be loyal to a worldview taught to them by their funders. And because they are African-born on African soil, they become the perfect delivery system for neo-colonial ideas. Their Africanness becomes their shield and hides the origin of their agenda. This is why I'm calling it what it is. It is betrayal, not a loud betrayal like a corrupt president, but one could argue that it is a more effective betrayal because it penetrates the minds of the people. It's more subtle because this betrayal gives those presidents the legitimacy they need to keep the system running. It convinces the population that the Western model is the only model, and it ensures Africa remains exactly where foreign interests want it: dependent, divided, and easily controlled. I would love to know what you guys think about this out there. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. But if you have nothing to say, would it be too much if I asked you to write the words "expose the betrayal" in the comments section? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you like what I'm doing, and want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.